In the previous video I made the lamp, and in this video I'm going to show you how I made the tentacle that actually holds the lamp. I started by importing a 3D model of the tentacle into Papercura and then converting it into a paper cutout template. I then printed, cut and taped the template together. All in all, it was over 25 pieces that needed to be cut and taped. I then glued the template together to make a paper tentacle. This tentacle will later serve as a template for the foam tentacle. I would use a marker to mark the seams on the paper tentacle. Then I will add some registration marks that I can later transfer to the foam. There isn't really a right or wrong way of doing this. The only thing I would recommend is using more registration marks than you actually need, just in case. Once all of the seams and the registration marks are on the paper template, I can simply cut along the seams to make my own little template. At this point you might be asking why I don't just use the template right away on foam, and the answer is simply because I want to test the template before I actually transfer it to the foam, and secondly, this approach allows me to tidy up the template outside of Papercura. Because while it is possible to tidy up the whole template inside Papercura, I found it much easier to do it like this, because the whole process inside of Papercura is somewhat tedious. There are several different methods to make templates for foam crafting. I have a guide on my website that goes over all of them, including manual methods or using other programs like Blender, for example. After tidying up the template, I ended up with only 15 pieces that I had to cut out of foam. Now this is much more manageable than 25. I used some very small nails to fix the templates to the EVA foam. I then start tracing all of the templates onto the foam. I also added some numbers to the individual pieces just so that I don't confuse them later on when I assemble the whole thing. Also, very important, don't forget to trace the registration marks onto the foam. You will need them later on. Once all of the parts are traced, all that is left to do is simply cut them out. I'm using a very sharp box knife for that. It is very important to sharpen your box knife after every 5 to 6 cuts, as foam will dull your knife very quickly. After all of the parts are cut, it's finally time for gluing. I'm using contact cement, which is a glue that you apply to both sides. Let it dry until it is dry to the touch, and then it will adhere instantly as soon as you press both parts together. This glue allows me to very accurately align and glue all of the parts together, as you can see right here. This is also where the registration marks come in handy, as we can use them to align the pieces perfectly. So this might be a good time to talk about why I'm using EVA foam for this project. Well, the answer is really easy. EVA foam is easy to work with and comparably cheap to the alternatives that I had. Also, EVA foam is very light, which is perfect for a big lamp like this that protrudes quite far out. Once I was done gluing all of the parts together, I realized that the tip of the tentacle was not quite the way I wanted it to be, so I didn't assemble it fully and opted to basically sculpt it out of some foam clay. Foam clay is really amazing stuff. I love to use it to sculpt some organic shapes, and I also often use it to fix gaps and to smooth my EVA foam projects. You can use some water to ensure that the foam clay adheres well to the EVA foam, and water can also be used to smooth the surface of the foam clay. As you can see, this stuff is really versatile, and I tend to use it in a lot of my projects, not only in my EVA foam projects, by the way. Especially because you can use PVA glue and water to make this foam very rigid. Simply apply the mixture to the dried foam and it'll be as rigid as a rock after a couple of hours. In this project, however, I'm going to use a different method of sealing the foam, as you can see later on. I'm going to use the box knife to further shape the tentacle. I don't like the rough edges up here, so I will round them to make them look more organic. At this stage, I am not very worried about any seams or any gaps in the EVA foam, as I will fix those later. There are several ways to fix gaps and seams in EVA foam. I personally prefer using foam clay as it is very easy to apply and very easy to smooth. All you need to apply and smooth it is a little bit of water and your fingers. After this first initial smoothing, I am going to switch to a rotary tool. The rotary tool will allow me to further smooth and shape the tentacle, as you can see here. I am using a stone bit, as a stone bit will give me the smoothest surface. The rotary tool can also be used to add some texture to EVA foam. You will see that later on in this video. Finally, I am going to use a heat gun to seal the surface of the EVA foam. This should be done when you sanded the surface of the EVA foam a lot. It will ensure a smooth finish. Finally, before painting the tentacle, I had to add the suckers. I made them by using some, well, you guessed it, foam clay. Simply roll up some foam clay into tiny balls and then swash them. This will give us the basic shape and I can refine it after I put them on the tentacle. Finally, we just have to seal the foam and paint it. I will be using Flex Bond and I will be mixing it with a little bit of acrylic paint. This isn't really necessary, but it gives me a great base coat and it allows me to see where I already applied the mixture. And this is what the tentacle looked like after the paint was dry. I then used an airbrush to add a lighter color on top. If you don't have an airbrush, you can also just use a regular brush or a sponge to add some texture and color variations to the project. You can see me using a brush here to add some very light highlights to the suckers. And here you can see how to use a sponge to add some color variations and texture to the whole thing. Finally, it was time to add the lamp that I built in the first video. For that, I screwed a little hole in the bottom of the tentacle and then fed the wires through there. These wires go to some individual addressable LEDs inside of the lamp. These LEDs are going to be controlled by an Arduino. The Arduino is going to live inside of the tentacle. I wanted the tentacle to look like it came through a hole in a wooden wall. So I decided to make some wood out of the leftover EVA foam pieces. I arranged them in an interesting pattern and then painted on some damage. I then used a box cutter knife to cut it all out. And finally I used a rotary tool to add some texture. I am using two different stone bits here. One that is triangular, that removes a little bit less material, and one white one that you can see right here that removes quite a lot of material. I am also using this bit to add some texture. I then sealed the EVA foam just like before and painted it. This time, however, I added a white base coat and used speed paints to paint the base coat of the wood. Speed paints dry darker in recesses, which instantly gives the wood an aged look. I then used a sponge to add some highlights and I was done. I then glued the wood panels to the wall and painted the inner area black. This project isn't done yet, as I will replace most of the foam boards with real wooden boards in a later project, as you can see right here. Consider subscribing so that you don't miss that. And here is the final result so far.